listeners, to the Cosmic Confluence podcast, where soul meets science and ancient wisdom converges with modern inquiry. I'm your host, Sana, and listeners, today's conversation is really different. Um, in a cosmos where consciousness is the true frontier, how do we measure awakening? What if personal evolution wasn't vague or abstract, but something that could be observed, tracked, and even accelerated? Now, today's guest, Jim Marshall, listeners, is no stranger to that intersection. A polymath with over 50,000 hours of research across psychology, metaphysics, parapsychology, and theology. Jim is the creator of Septemics, which is a groundbreaking system that outlines 35 scales of human behavior, awareness, and spiritual development. Now, one of those scales, the scale of spiritual identity, it offers a stunning look at how we evolve across levels of consciousness. So, in this conversation, we explore how these hierarchies reveal your soul's orientation, challenge the ego, and potentially serve as a mirror to your current spiritual state. So, let's dive deep, not into philosophy for its own sake, but into a framework that could shift how we embody purpose, perceive our divinity, and navigate this multidimensional experience we call life. So, with that, Jim, welcome to the show, and I am absolutely honored to have you once again with us.
Thanks, son. It's great to talk to you again.
Absolutely. Okay. Jim, from the lens of psychology or spirituality, Um, what exactly is Septemics? I mean, how does it move beyond these two worlds, to offer something new?
Okay. Well, the first thing I should say to give context
Okay.
for viewers is that I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I created a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published it in the book Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7.
Mhm.
Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 such scales, each of which is unique, and together they span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any problem, dilemma, situation, difficulty, etc., that any person has related to people can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales, usually more than one.
Okay.
So this is extremely helpful to people in their relationships, all kinds of relationships across the board. Any interaction with humans is assisted by this material.
Wow. And the relationships that you're talking about. So, not only with our loved ones or family or friends or colleagues, but with ourselves, do you think Septemics can help us look at relationship with ourselves from a different perspective?
Yes, it is it is to help you understand yourself and to help you understand others. And others, I mean all others, all humans. Every person is at some level on every scale, no exceptions. So this is like a blood pressure. You have a blood pressure. I don't know what it is, but you have it. That is why when you go to the doctor, no matter what's wrong with you, no matter what your complaint is, they always take your blood pressure because they know that you have one and they don't know what it is. So it takes 3 or 4 minutes and they find out what it is and write it down. So that's what this is like. And there's no question that is the person on this scale? That is not a question. The person is on the scale. It's a question of whether or not you can figure out what level the person is at. Now, if you understand the person well and you understand the material well, this is not difficult.
I got it. I got it. Wow, that's really intriguing. And Jim, you mentioned that there are 35 levels or scale, and then there are each scale is like different, levels there. Do you think the entire um humanity, the behavior, um and across civilizations, across generations, can all these experiences be kind of mathematized or created into 35 scales, or this will keep on evolving as we go through different timelines and evolutions?
Okay, there's actually a couple of different questions there.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, this is relevant to every person on earth.
Okay.
Meaning it is the person is at some level on each of these scales. Now, whether or not there are other scales besides these 35, that's a possibility. Now, I haven't found any. I've been, I worked with this material. I worked on this book for 25 years, and that was after an equal amount of research. The book has been out almost 5 years, so I've had a lot of data come my way about this, and I do not expect to find another scale. I'm not saying it's impossible,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but there might be other scales. Also, it's worth saying there is an immense amount of data suggesting that people on other planets are very often very much like humans. They may even be genetically compatible with humans in some cases. There are thousands of witnesses who've discussed people from other planets look who are so much like us that they could be sitting in the room with you and you would have no way of telling they were from another planet. Now, does that mean Septemics applies to them? I really don't know. The the engineer in me hesitates to give an answer to that question because it's speculative. But
Yeah.
it's probably true that a lot of extraterrestrials, this would work on them too.
Wow. Wow. And there are so many possibilities and applications here of septemics. In fact, and even understanding, the alien civilizations on other planets as well. It could definitely provide a framework in there.
Right. It's worth mentioning that the subtitle is Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. And then the subtitle is Analysis, Prediction, and Management of Human Affairs. So this is about humans. Doesn't apply to animals, doesn't apply to non corporeal beings.
Mhm.
Actually, I think what happens, and I've done a lot of study and research on this, is that when people go up these scales and get to the top of these scales, there is a point at which they then have resolved one's karma and then stop reincarnating and go into the spirit world. In other words, to become what you might call an angel.
Yep.
Uh, so when you descend to the level of being human, then you descend into the realm of septemics.
Wow. Wow. That is really, really interesting. As you mentioned about the spiritual aspect, one of your most intriguing contributions is in fact the scale of spiritual identity. Well, so how does this framework help individuals recognize when they are on their spiritual path? And how does it also support deeper alignment?
Every time you correctly spot your level on any scale, that is a description of your condition as a person. Uh, so there are 35 axes here. So this is very sophisticated. So the general rule is that most people are high on some scales and low on other scales. That is typically
Mhm.
what you find. Um, so one of the reasons that this is so valuable is that anytime you correctly spot anyone on any scale, whether it's yourself or another, you have a consequent insight, or you might call it a realization. So let's say you have some trouble with your mother in law. So you say, gee, I wonder where she is on the scale of control. So then you spot her at level 6. Ah, now I see what's going on with her. She's at level 6. This is what we call a control freak.
Okay.
So obviously, that is a big insight into her personality. That is part of her spiritual identity, her mental identity. And the challenges that we have to deal with at these various levels are the challenges of a being trying to ascend or trying to resist descending. So,
Mhm.
what typically happens is when a person has something beneficial happen to him, he tends to ascend to the next highest level. And when he has something traumatic happen to him, he tends to descend to the next lowest level.
Mm.
Now, of course, this varies a lot from scale to scale because some of the scales are what I call persistent scales, and some of them are more, uh, I guess you could say, uh, changeable or
Okay.
volatile. So some of these scales, people could change on them in minutes. You can actually watch a person go up certain scales, just like watching them climb a ladder. Then there are other scales that most people do not change much, if at all. For example, the scale of basic purposes. Most humans spend an entire lifetime at one level of that scale. There are very specific technical reasons for that. And if you study that chapter, you'll see it explains. And again, this ties into something that is in Oriental philosophy change or
Mhm.
polarity. 7 of these scales have polarity built into them, where you're going one way on one level and the opposite way on the other level. So, in order to change level, you must reverse polarity. And that has been known for thousands of years to be a very big deal to get a person to reverse polarity. But it's
Mm.
something that people in Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism have understand. This is something that's not a new idea.
Mm. And, Jim, this is what I also agree with, that there is a fine line between awareness and spiritual ego. So, what safeguards does Septemics offer to ensure that this system is based for growth rather than hierarchy or judgment?
Okay, first of all, as I state in the book, judgmental people are going to be judgmental, no matter what they use. It doesn't matter if they're Christians or Hindus or atheists, they're going to be judgmental. They're judgmental people. People who are not judgmental, whatever system they're in, are not going to be judged. So, in other words, there are judgmental Christians, there are non judgmental Christians. There are judgmental Buddhists, there are non judgmental Buddhists. And I think that's what we're talking about here. So, uh, the thing about Septemics that's unusual is it's based entirely on natural law. These scales exist in nature the same way that Newton's three laws of motion exist, the same way that Archimedes' principle exists, the same way that the periodic table exists. And I just stumbled across them because of my background in engineering and the fact I worked for 40 years as a human development engineer and observed these phenomena and wrote them down. And what convinced me that I was onto something is you have to realize that my clients had no idea what techniques or theories I was using, uh, how I was doing what I was doing. In other words, all they knew is they came to me with an unwanted condition or a situation, and I helped them resolve it. That's all they knew. So what would happen is the person would come to me. He would be I would observe that he was at a specific level on one of these scales, and I would work with him, and he would go up to the next level on that scale. Now, I'm not saying he knows anything about this. He doesn't, but I observe it. And the fact that he knows nothing about it verifies my hypothesis. In other words, there's no placebo effect. There's no power of suggestion. I simply observed these phenomena and wrote them down based on my interaction with hundreds of people. And then I would go out of the session into the real world and see exactly the same phenomena on people wherever I went. Like I'd be at a supermarket and I'd see two people interacting and I'd say, oh, this guy's at this level on this scale. It's just like, the knowing the difference between a tulip and a rose. The difference between a tulip and a rose is not an opinion. It's a fact. Either it's a tulip or it's a rose. Uh, and it's the same thing with this. There's no guesswork. Now, you may not be able to spot what level you're at or what level another person is at in some cases, but if you do, it is a fact. And let me give you an analogy. Let's say you had a garden and you know that I like gardens. So you say, Jim, come and look at my garden. So I go to Sana's house and I say, oh, she has hydrangeas, chrysanthemums, tulips, roses, violets, forget-me-nots, begonias. Now, the reason I can do that is I know all about flowers because I've been involved in gardening.
Wow. Okay.
But if you bring some 5-year-old girl into your garden, she's going to see and smell exactly what I saw and smelled. But all she can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice.
Mm.
That's all she knows.
Yeah.
Now, most adults are like that little girl as regards people. They don't know what they're looking at. So a guy goes to a bar, right? Right? And he meets some girl.
Mm-hmm.
Says, gee, she's pretty and she smells nice. That's exactly what the little girl said about your garden.
Yeah.
That's all he knows. You see? Whereas if he knew this material, he could spot her on certain scales, and that would tell him a lot about who she is as a person and to what extent she's going to be a benefit to him. Because remember, once you analyze the person by finding the level, you can then predict what the person is going to do. And once you can predict what the person is going to do, you can then manage the relationship for better or worse. So, uh, this is extremely helpful in dealing with people across the board in any context. So let me give you an example. Let's
Okay.
say you're dating some guy for 3 years and you're thinking about getting married, right?
Mhm.
Wouldn't it be reasonable to ask yourself, why does this guy want to marry me? I mean, isn't that
Exactly.
a reasonable question?
Yeah.
I'm not saying to ask the guy. I'm saying open the book to the scale of motivation. There are only 7 basic motivations. Now, you know the guy because you've been around him for 3 years.
Mhm.
If you study the book and you study the chapter, you will be able to find his motivation. You'll be that will not be hard for you to see. Now, say you decide, oh, he's at level 1, love. That's the highest motivation of all, level 1. Well, okay, let's set the date. That's a good reason to marry somebody. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe what happens is you say, now that I thought about this, I think this guy wants to marry me because I drive a Lamborghini. I have a 60-foot yacht. I fly my own Learjet. I live in a $10 million condo, and I have $5 million in the bank. That's a different motivation. That's level 4 money. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad, but it's different. Now, what you do with it is up to you. You might say, okay, this is not the first time somebody wanted to marry me for my money, but this guy is smart. He's funny. He's handsome. He's congenial. He's polite. So I'm going to marry him anyway. And you might live happily ever after.
Mm.
But that might not happen. You might say, wait a minute. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself. And you break up with him because you don't want to marry somebody who's motivated by money. Now, that's up to you. Now, if you break up with him because he's money motivated, you will not be upset about that. You're not going to say, oh dear, I'm so unhappy because we broke up. You're going to be relieved. You're going to say, boy, am I glad I figured this out now.
Exactly.
So, you see, every time you correctly spot a level, whether it's yours or another person, you always have a realization or an epiphany, and that is a positive thing. You say, now I understand what's going on with Mary. That's why we couldn't get along. You see, it's specific. And so, this is really useful in helping you to manage your affairs with people.
Mm. That definitely makes it very clear. Very clear.
Yeah.
And Jim, before we wrap up, I mean, let's look at Septemics from the lens of mystical experiences, or these epiphanies or realizations. How, because some would argue, especially the mystics, that true awakening or true self-awareness is it's non-linear and it's spontaneous. So does a structured model like Septemics truly capture the essence of divine realization, or it's just a way to quantify and give a more scientific validation to it?
I think you're asking the wrong question, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
This is an entirely new body of data. It's just like, let's say you have a guy, he doesn't know anything about chemistry, okay? He goes to a chemistry class, he starts on page 1, he goes through, and little by little, he learns chemistry. He gets all new ideas, okay? There are thousands of ideas in chemistry. This is the same thing. So, as far as the mystical aspect, the spiritual aspect, they are reflected in the top of every scale. For example, the scale of basic purposes, the highest
Mhm.
level is what I call the saint. The purpose of the saint is to transcend. Gandhi was at this level. Jesus was at this level. Gautama was at this level. So you see, that explains those people on this axis. And you will find if you go through the scales, that is true for all the scales. For example, the next scale is the scale of personal influence. The highest level on this scale is telepathy.
Oh.
That is a mystical ability. Okay? And
Mhm.
in a sense, telepathy is the same as will. In other words, you can influence somebody telepathically. You just will the person to do something. That is a spiritual ability. You see? And this is true as you go through all of the scales. So, for example, the scale of choice, the third chapter, the highest level is no choice necessary. That's what
Mm.
transcendence is. Transcendence is no choice necessary. When you are transcendent, you don't need to make a choice. You follow me? You are
Yep.
above the necessity for making a choice. So this goes all the way through the book. And of course, at the bottom, you find the dregs of society, and at the top, you find the elites, the true elites. It's not a question of money or fame, it's a question of the being. The scale of permeation, chapter 4. Level 1 is complete permeation. This person can simply permeate something. Uh, he can extract information from whatever he permeates because his
Mhm.
permeation is complete. That is a spiritual ability. And
Mm.
so this goes all the way through the book. So the spiritual phenomena is at the top of all the scales. So scale 5, level 1 is create. Well, creating is a spiritual ability. The highest level of thought is creative thought. How do you explain that? That is what people talk about God being the creator, right?
Yep.
That means he's at that level. Or if you go to the scale of identity, the highest level is no need for an identity. What kind of a person would have no need for an identity? This would be a totally extroverted person.
Mm.
So this person is not going to be judgmental. He's not going to have any ego. He doesn't have a need for an identity. See, these levels are not even going to be comprehensible to many people
Yep.
because it's all, but to people who are at these levels, they'll say, ah, that explains who I am, or that explains who this. For example, I was educated by uh, religious people, and I
Mhm.
knew some who were saints. Now, at the time, I did not know this scale, but in retrospect, I knew I was looking at something special and divine and beautiful. And so I could see that now, in retrospect, I had the good fortune of knowing some saints.
Yeah.
And, it's like my sophomore English teacher, Father
Mhm.
Dean. It almost seemed like his feet didn't touch the ground.
Mm.
He was so, you could almost see the halo. He was just filled with love, a transcendent person.
Mm.
A lot of people who are like that go into the religious life. Whether it's an ashram or a convent or a monastery or a rectory or whatever, they join a religious order. So, uh, if you're into the spiritual aspect of life,
Mhm.
you find yourself described in these scales, all 35.
Wonderful, Jim. So, if our listeners they would like to explore more about Septemics, reach out to you. What will be the best way?
Well, I would invite your guests or your viewers to come to my website, which is septemics.com, Septemics, where you can see what many readers have said about it, what many journalists have written about it, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself. And there's even a 15-minute pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that explains it to a new person in 15 minutes.
No problem. I'll make sure to have the details and links in the show notes. And Jim, Septemics definitely invites us to witness the evolution of our soul, not just as a vague yearning, but what I believe as a deliberate unfolding. So, thank you. Thank you so much for all the hard work, the research that you have put into this in helping us understand this in a better way, ourselves in a better way.
Thank you, Sana. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, listeners, I invite all of you to explore Jim's work and see where you might be on the journey, not to become more, but to remember who you have always been. Just refer to the show notes to connect with Jim and read and explore more about Septemics. And until then, this is your host, Sana, and this is Cosmic Confluence. And of course, the true confluence happens not in theory, but in embodiment. With that, thank you so much.